Right, so we've got a terrain sculpted and in our colony and bent in the right kind of angle so it fits in the space, which is all well and good, but obviously it looks fairly awful, just being this kind of bland, straightforward green with a specular highlight on it, which is no good. So what we're going to do is go back to our sculpt file, terrain sculpt, and we're going to actually create some textures for the terrain. Now, I've contemplated doing this with body paint. Another method I've used in the past is to actually use ZBrush, where I probably would have done the sculpt in actual fact, but I also would have textured in ZBrush using the various tools in there to apply this to the terrain and paint directly onto it. Poly painting it's called, using photographic textures and such like. But in this case, what I'm going to do is create this procedurally. There's a number of little tools we can utilize to blend various textures together and have them separated by the angle, the slope that they're on, and equally the altitude they're at. And I think we can probably get fairly close to a convincing kind of ground texture with a bit of sand and rocks and such like, just using this method. So let's go ahead with it. Right, the first thing we need to do is get rid of this. We're not needing that anymore, so I'm just going to turn that off and hide it. And just do a quick render just so we can see what we're looking at. Right, so at the moment we've still got the RGB displacement mesh, as well as the rudimentary, sorry, that's the band, rudimental, water plane in there, as well as our grey displacement. I'm going to get rid of the RGB. I can't see that we're going to use that. I'm just going to stick to the standard grey. We've also got our original file, the original sculpt terrain, which again I'm going to keep for now. I may well go back to that. I may even use that for baking out our texture, but from the point of view of speed, if I just turn this on, from the point of view of speed, this terrain with the amount of polygons it's got on it is going to be a lot quicker to preview with the displacement map we created than using this. So let's go ahead with it. Let's start making a material. Well, in fact, what have we got here? Let's see which one of these is the RGB. We can get rid of that. That'll be that one. Okay. So I'm just going to delete that and double click on this one. I'm going to rename this as well. Call this, let's call this Mountain Green. This is going to be the sort of overall main base color that's going to cover most of the terrain. So I'm going to turn off the normals. I don't want to use that. I'm just going to use displacement. And in terms of color, let's just quickly put in something. Let's go to somewhere around here. Let's just level that 100. Oops, didn't mean to do that. And obviously make this green. Somewhere around there should be okay, actually. Just want a fairly neutral green. Now I'm going to turn off reflectance because we certainly don't need that, and I want to layer some things up in here. So I'm going to add a texture, a grass texture, which I've from my own collection or own tiled textures I've made in the past. So I've got some textures that I used to sell on Renderosity in here. Where are we? Coastal elements, Grassy Mound. Now this is a texture that I've made from. I started off with this, which is obviously a bit more sort of interesting, but I obviously at some point needed to make a more even, larger scale grass texture. So I'm going to use one of these. I'm going to go for that one. Do you want to create a copy of the project? Like no. Okay, so obviously if I do a quick render, you can see that that's completely wrong in terms of its scale. This is not a big texture, it's only 1000 by 1000 pixels. And obviously our terrain here is, based on the displacement map we created, is 20,000 by 2000 pixels. So I obviously need to tile this. This is a tileable texture. I need to make it much, much smaller. Now, some way you can do this, obviously, if you go to the texture tag and you add tiles, whatever, 10. And that works in certain instances, of course. But obviously, because we're using this texture, this material, which has the displacement channel in it, or map in it, this needs to be a 1-to-1 size. So this isn't going to work. So I need to bring that back to 0. And what we do need to do, actually that should be 1, shouldn't it? Right. What we do need to do is to find a way of making this tiled within here. So the way to do that is to go to, or put it inside a layer, click on the layer, and then add an effect, which is transform, which now allows us to scale this texture in the layer. So I'm going to scale this down to 0.1. Let's have a look at that. And that's still way too big. So what I've got to do is go down to about 0.01. Oops. 1. Turn. Now that in itself is obviously not going to be sufficient for what we need, but it's certainly the start in terms of giving a bit of texture to our overall grass or ground colour. So the next thing I tend to do to break this up and make it more interesting is to add some diffusion, or noise typically in the diffusion channel. So activate diffusion, go to noise, and my favourite to use for this kind of thing is Wavy Turbulence. Just do a quick render of that as it is. And the scale I think we need for this is, I'm going to guess, around 250 to the render. You see that's breaking up that grass texture, making it a bit more patchy looking. But we're still not all the way there. So what I want to do is layer another noise on top of this one, or another version of the noise. In fact, before I do that, let me just clip this a little bit. I want to make the whites whiter, because I don't want this to darken the grass too much. Let's go for 80 on that and have a look again. Just want to keep the green brighter. Okay, right, so I'm going to add a layer and then add another shader, noise, over the top. And this one I'm going to make this at a larger scale. I'm going to go for 600, I think, on that one. I'm going to clip that as well so it's still whiter. And I'm going to use Wavy Turbulence again for that. All I need to do is make sure that it's multiplied over it so they both show up. Yeah, I may well tone that down, but that's certainly a starting point. So let's just lower the opacity of that effect so it's not quite so dark. That's much better. If I just, I'll just put on the interactive render region. If I just turn the diffusion off, you can see the difference. We get this very, very even, but despite the fact that we've got a sort of a rough grassy texture in there, adding the diffusion certainly makes it more patchy, breaks up the whole effect of it. And I tend to use this effect using diffusion and using various noises, certainly Wavy Turbulence quite a bit. I use this for adding dirt or to break up any texture, just to make it more organic, really. Okay, so the other thing I want to do is I actually don't want to see the grass quite so intensely, so I'm actually going to knock that down. I'm going to knock this down to maybe 55% so it blends with our base green. So we get the benefit of it, but we don't have it overpowering. Just to show the difference. Yeah, so I'm going to, 55 will do. We will need to add some bump to this as well, which will certainly help add a little bit more visual interest when it comes to a bit of lighting, which I shall add in a moment. And again, I'm going to go for a noise. But this time I think I'm just going to use regular turbulence. And I'm going to scale it down to about 60%. To increase the bump height, I think. Let's take that up so we can see what we're doing. Again, that's better. Be more evident with actual lighting in here, but that's made the ground a little bit more uneven, a bit rougher. And what else? Let's turn the delta down to 50. Let's knock that down a little bit. Well, maybe not quite so much. Let's go for 70. Going closer. Now I'm going to reduce the octave count from 5 to maybe 3. I don't want quite as much. Ooh. Let's try the delta down at 50 again, see if that helps. No, actually, I can put that back up to 4. I think that'll be okay. Again, a lot of these things can be tweaked as we go along, and having light in there is going to make a difference. In fact, to make this a little bit more easy to see and more useful, I'm going to throw in a physical sky, which will just give us the instant effect of sunlight and blue sky above, which should help a little bit. In fact, let's just go out and I'll have a look at the time of the day. Well, that's right ahead, so let's make that a bit lower. Let's make it like tea time, early evening or late afternoon. It's a bit better. I'm just doing this so I've got something that gives a bit more character to the terrain, so I can see details in it. And the other thing I'm going to do is rotate the position of the light. Get some shadows. That's better. Okay, that's already looking better. Now, in fact, we've got displacement on, so let's just turn that off a second. Now, the other thing I want to add to this is some rocks. I want to get some, nothing too drastic, just get some nice mountainy, rocky areas here that would show through on the slopes. So to do that, I'm going to just make a blank material for now. I'm just going to keep probably with a basic grey, just lower it a little bit. Turn off reflectance. And I'm going to lay this over the top of the green. I'm going to stack this on top. Now obviously that's just overruling all of the green at the moment. So what we need to do is in the alpha channel of this texture, material rather. There it is. Try to bring the window up. We need to use a shader called Falloff. Where is it? There we go, Falloff. There we go. Now, this is obviously given this rather fiery looking gradient, but really all we need is black to white. So I'm just going to change that to white. And object I think is okay, direction is okay, need to turn that on. And let's just bring up the render region again. So at the moment that's just completely overriding it still with the grey. We're not actually getting any fall off at all, but if we go in and tweak the position of these clamps or handles, we can start to see how it starts to allow the other terrain to show through. Now in fact it's doing the inverse of what I want, because I want this area to be rock and this area to be green. So I'm going to flip these around, put the black all the way. Oops, don't need that one. Let's see what happens here. So straight away you can see, I'm just going to turn off the physical sky again for now, just to make it a bit quicker. You can see where, let's expand this out as well. Oops, don't mean to do that. Undo view, drag that out. There we go. You can see there where what basically is happening is it gets towards edges that are falling off, as the shader name would suggest. We are getting the grey, which ultimately will be a rock face. So it's just a case really of tweaking how much of that shows and how much of it, you know, how far you push it to go away. I don't really want to see it right at the top here. I want this to still be quite green. So I need to tweak this and bring the black end, or black clamp, further in. In fact, let's open that up and look at some figures. What have we got here? No, okay, that'll be fine. Just round that off. But I think what I'm going to do with this one is bring this one in a little bit. Let's round that to 90. Why not? Nope, didn't do it. There we go. Let's see what that looks like. Now, you'll notice there something starts to go a bit strange. This has got something to do with the fact that we're layering an alpha over the displacement. Certainly with this effect on it, I've noticed this before. I can reduce that by moving the placement of it. It's quite strange, really. It sort of clips it, it seems. And I'm not entirely sure how to sort that out, how to make that go away. But I think I'm not going to worry about that too much, because when it comes to the final, that won't be an issue. But just to be clear on it, let me just show you. Just going to turn off the displacement. So you can see that you kind of need the displacement, obviously, to drive the detail in the terrain and put in our river sort of trench here. But you also need it to make this more interesting and break up the terrain and create more variation. So that will entirely be the effect that we get at the end. But in terms of previews, unfortunately, unless there's some other way around it, which I'm not aware of, anybody does know how to get around this, please put some comments below when this is posted. We just have to put up with seeing that anomaly, if you like, what's going on here. So I'm just going to raise the height of that a little bit to 0.8 while I was there. Right, let's go back to our rock material and the alpha. Put that up to 90. Let's see if I bring this down a little bit more. It just hardens that up, but no, okay, we'll leave that where it is. See what this is like a bit lower. This becomes a bit less opaque. But you can see the effect becomes less evident where this is affecting the displacement. So again, I'm not entirely sure what that is. It seems to be like some kind of clipping effect, but I don't really know why that does that, and I don't know how to get around it. But I'm not going to worry about that now. Let's see what that does. Yeah, well, that gets rid of that, but in actual fact, it doesn't affect the texturing too much, so maybe I'll leave it at that. I think it makes it a bit more opaque. Just do that. Let's put that down to 85. What happens if I pull the knot a bit further that way? Okay, I'll take it too far the other way. Okay, I'm going to take that a bit higher. Let's just take that one up to 88. How funny, that kicks in around there. Okay, I'm going to put this back to 50% between the two. I'm going to place that back at 96, let's say. Okay, again, this can be adjusted a bit further down the line, but I think that gives us the or gives me the general effect I want. And I just need to find some rock texture to put inside that. I just move the viewpoint around and have another look. These are the sides with rocks on. Okay, I think that's probably given us enough of what we need. While I'm here and I'm previewing it this way, I'm going to add some bump, and I'm going to use some noise again for that. In fact, let me just turn this interactive render region off for a bit. I'm going to use noise. I'm going to use one of my favorite noises for rock, which is Naki. And I'm going to make the scale of that about 200%. I do need the render region again. Let's just bring it over here. Okay, just increase the effect of it a little bit by pushing the clip. Increase the contrast between the two. And oh, we're at 20%. That's not helping. Let's go for 100. Whoa, that's much more like it. Might dial this back a bit actually. Okay, that's a good starting point. So regardless of whatever text we put in there now, it's certainly got some detail in it in terms of bump, and that's certainly going to help with being a bit more convincing. I like that. We may be showing a little bit too much rock here, but certainly that'll do for now. The whole terrain has got to be taken into account, and it's not all as mountainous as that. So it might not be a problem. No, see there's not much at all over here. That's okay. It would be nice to have some rock face on it. As I said before, my idea for this particular bit of ground, or in fact this colony, is maybe we're treating it a little bit like a holiday resort, as daft as that might sound. I think there's some appeal in this place being, you know, an interesting place to hang out, or a nice peaceful place to hang out, and to have activities, and maybe some people want to do some rock climbing, as well as sitting around by a beach or swimming the river or whatever. So the next thing I want to do then is to add sand as well. I want to put in a beachy sort of effect. So I may well do that actually before I start thinking about the textures that go in these. Let's just create another one. I'm going to turn this off. I create a new material, and we'll give it a rough sort of color of sand. I'm going to turn off reflectance, and again I'm going to layer that on top of this. Now for this one, I can't use Falloff, I don't think. So I'm going to use another shader in the alpha channel, which is the terrain mask. So let's find that. Is it called terrain mask? It's terrain something. Effects, terrain mask, yeah. There we go. So you see that's doing a similar thing already to the Falloff. I don't know what that would be like when we render it. Okay. That is something we're going to just use the altitude masking instead of the slope masking. And you can see we've just got this band, and what we want to basically do is set this up so that it only appears in the lower flatlands of the terrain. So you control the altitude, the minimum and maximum obviously here, and I don't know exactly what my highest altitude is at this point, but I certainly know that it's no lower really than, I don't know, say maybe -2, probably isn't even that much. But if I put that in there and then put in something like 2 here, I'm going to put on the render region. Oh, that's still way too high. Let's try 1. Okay, so we're just starting to get the top of the terrain showing up. So this is obviously nowhere near this high. So I'm going to go for, say, 0.2. Well, that's a bit closer. Let's go to 0.1. Okay. Now what I might need to consider here also is the soften min and max, because I obviously don't want a hard edge like this. And you see, this is another thing, I'm just showing you this here in terms of when you're working with the displacement map and layering other stuff over the top with alphas. You'll see we get a really sharp cut where the edge of this alpha is, which there doesn't really seem to be a way around that I'm aware of, but I'm certainly going to soften this up by adjusting this now. See what that looks like. Well, that's disappeared altogether. Let's try 20%. Okay, that's looking a bit more like it. So maybe zoom out again a bit. That's not bad. In fact, I'm going to switch from this interactive render region to a plugin which I recently installed. I only heard about it. I was watching some demonstrations of Arnold Render and Octane, and the wonderful much faster version that is in those renderers of this particular, they're called IPR, I think it is in those, where you get basically a real-time refresh. And on this particular post, somebody mentioned a plugin by Nitro 4D, I think it is, called Magic Preview, which certainly helps a lot. It's not obviously quite as fast as Arnold or Octane, certainly not Octane, but it does give the effect. If I click in there, you get a very quick redraw or preview. Just clicking that again. So this is quite useful to use when you're doing this kind of thing. So I can dock this somewhere. What I find is often useful is to just dock it over to the side of my viewport. As you can see, I get a pretty rapid redraw. So it's well worth checking out. If I remember, I'll put a link in the comments, or whatever section below the info section. Otherwise, I think if you just do a search for Nitro 4D, he's done a lot of very, very useful plugins, and this is certainly very helpful for very fast previewing. I highly recommend it. I think it's probably selling itself though at the speed it's working at the moment. I will just quickly show you. At the moment, this is set to 50% quality. I can take this down to really low, and obviously, this is very, very basic. But again, it could have its uses. You could preview the stuff still, even though you can't see things very clearly. If you're previewing lighting, or just like we're doing here, the distribution of a texture, then it's perfectly adequate. But it will go all the way up to 100%, which is still a lot faster than if I was to do it with the interactive render region. So I'm not entirely sure what voodoo he's got to play with this, but it's very useful. This bit here as well, this is anti-aliasing, I think. If I turn that off, you get an even faster preview. You see it's very sharp, jagged edges. If I turn that up to the top, then things tend to be a bit smoother and it takes a bit longer. But again, for previewing, you can take that right off and put this down to 50% and have a near instant feedback. So this can be useful in this particular instance, I think. So I quite like that. I think the distribution's okay. I perhaps don't want quite as much beach as that, but the overall effect is there. Let me bring this material up again and have a look at it. Okay, so look at the alpha. Let's try this at 0.3. Obviously that's way too much sand, but if I try that at 30, and what about if we crunch this a little bit? Oh, that's quite interesting. You see what's coming out there. It's starting to bring out just a real subtle change, which is nice. You're getting a little bit of that detail of the grass, the mounds, if you like. It's starting to look a bit more like dunes, which is nice. So if I bring that up a little bit, what about if I play around with this noise? What's this? Oh, let's try that one. Oh, that's obviously going to be too much. Whoa! Extreme 0.5. So extreme. See how that's messing up the displacement as well. Try a 0.0 figure. That's a little better. What's the scale do? Okay, so quite clearly, if I just zoom in, let's go over there. You can see that that's the scale of the noise, which is sort of breaking up the edges. So let's try that as a 30, not 20%, 30%. That's quite cool. What about if we go bigger? That's pretty cool as well. What about reducing the white? Maybe up a little bit. Might go the other way. Again, it's a bit more extreme. Well, that's alright. What about this global coordinates thing? I'm not sure what that... Whoa, I won't use that then. That doesn't help us. Right. What else can we tweak on this? No obvious difference. There seems to be, again, very subtle transitions. So, I get a better picture of it. Okay, I think I'm going to leave that. That's too much. Let's have a look at the figures on this. Oops. So that's 100. Bring that up a bit. Let's go to 75 on that. And .3. I think that's probably going to need a bit more tweaking actually, but okay, that'll do for now, I guess. So let's get down to sort of level, and also let's bring the sky back on. That'll be nicer to preview, I think. Yeah, that's coming together. Okay, so I want to get some rocky texture in here. So again, I'm going to open up my stone material. I'm just going to turn this preview off for now. Just click in it to turn it off so it doesn't update. I'm going to put in a texture again. So I'm going to go to my folder of textures. What have I got in here? Oh no, I don't want to use that one. What have we got? It's not what I wanted. What's this mountain cliff? What else have I got? In fact, let me try a different source. I might use my good buddy Curio's textures. Got some textures here from Tintagel in Cornwall. And I seem to remember there's a nice. There we go. That's good. I quite like the cliffs one. Again, these are not very big, but I'm going to be tiling them and spread them across this whole terrain, so I might get away with it. I'm going to try this one, see what this looks like. Strata. No. Now, if I just do a quick preview again, you can see that's stretched across the whole thing because obviously it's taking a 1000 by 1000 JPEG and it's stretching it across a 20,000 by 2000 ratio plane. So it's it's like become a stripe, basically, a set of stripes. So I'm going to need to tile this as well. But what I can do as well at the moment, that's currently laying on the on top of the green terrain in a UV mapping format. If I change that to cubic projection, then that instantly is better. But it needs to be made smaller. So again, I'm going to use the method we used before with the grass to tile it within this shader rather than on the actual texture itself here. So I'm going to put this inside a layer and go to Effect, Transform. Let's just scale that down to say 0.5, just half the size. This is the X and Z, I think. Let me just see what that does. Don't think that'll do anything. No. That'll be the Z, sorry. This is X and Y. So that's okay, that's showing up quite well. Let's just go in a closer look at it. Not navigating very well here. Just going to turn this sky around a bit so I can get a not quite so shadowy look of it. It's better. It's okay. I'm just going to try an alternative actually. Let's have a look at this one. The one we got in here was the cliffs one, which I saw first. I like this as well because it's got some green mixed in with it, which kind of helps it blend. Oh, that's nice. That's quite effective, I think. I'll put the alias in halfway to that as well, so smooth that out a little bit. Yeah, I think I like that more. Quick tweak of the physical sky object with rotation, just to get a different shadow effect. just want that to 100. Now, I don't need this to be absolutely perfect in terms of texture detail, because I don't really plan on being this close to it at any point. But I need to allow for the fact that I might go down to terrain level. I certainly don't want to see sort of pixelization. So maybe I need to scale this down a little bit more, the rock. Let me just look at that again, see if we can take that down to say 0. Let's do the half and see what that looks like. It may look like the details are too fine, but ooh, that's not right. Ha, that'll be it. Let's go bring that back down to just over 50%, make it a bit quicker. I think we can get away with that. I think that's this is certainly a lot quicker than messing around with painting textures. And in fact, it's obviously getting effects that I wouldn't have done by doing it manually, because this is creating this procedurally. A lot of this detail and variation is being created purely because of the altitude, the slope, and the actual differences in the terrain caused by the displacement. And again, I'll prove that by just going to the base material which got the displacement on it. If I just turn that off, you can still see that obviously we've got a slope here because of the altitude and everything, but we've lost some of the kind of the breakup of the detail and the way the materials are broken up and the way they lay out over the top of each other. If I put the displacement back on again, you're getting much more of that variation which the displacement is forcing the shaders to do. So again, I wouldn't necessarily have come up with that or added that much detail when I was painting it. So this saves an awful lot of manual effort, really. Now, looking over there, I'm not sure that the tiling I've done of the rock will work, because I'm seeing quite a bit of it over there, and I can see that it tiles. You can see I'm getting the repetition, which I don't overly like. I won't necessarily see that piece of terrain in any great detail or without shadow or trees on it, so it may not be a problem, but certainly that's something I need to consider. Right, I'm going to go back into the rock terrain. And I'm going to try this at 0.35. And let's go back in again. Oh, that's where we noticed it, wasn't it? It's not quite so bad. I can still see some repetition, but again, I guess when there's some trees on there, this will be lost. Not too evident anyway. The other thing I can do, of course, is to add. Let's just go in there a bit closer. I can add some diffusion to this using noise as well. So if I go in there, because this helps break up any repeating pattern. Let's go to noise. Maybe we'll try. I will try like we've used in the actual bump of it. I'm just going to turn off the colour of this for now, so I can see, turn the mix strength so I can just see grey, and then I can see what my bump is doing. Sorry, not my bump, my diffusion. I'm just going to pull the clip down so it's brighter white, and let's alter the scale. I'm not entirely sure which way it's going at the moment, so let's have a look. Let's turn off the bump as well. Let's try and let's set to UV. Ah, that makes more sense. Right. See, that's breaking that up quite nicely. Turn that off. It might be a little bit too defined. I don't know, that's probably okay. Let's just bring in the low clip as well, make it a bit darker. Lighter clip down. Lower the octaves, takes some detail out of the noise. If I go all the way down to 1, you start to get very smooth, which is obviously not really what we want. So, and the higher I go, the more broken that becomes. But up to, after a certain point, it becomes unnoticeable. So normally about 5 or 6 is adequate. Let's try that. Let's see if that works with bringing the mix up again. See, that's broken that up already enough. If I just turn the diffusion off, you know, sure enough, we can just about see repetitions there. You can see this bit repeated there and there and there. I've got the diffusion back on. Although those repetitions are still there, it's kind of been confused by the diffusion laid over the top of it. So that's quite effective. I'm going to knock that down. I don't want it to be quite as bold as that, but that should be enough. 7%. Maybe more. There we go. I think we could probably get away with that. Put the bump on as well. I'll add a different. Yeah, I think that's quite effective. I'm quite happy with that. And again, we're examining this in detail. Whereas if we're in a position like this where we're away from it all, and just seeing it sort of in the corner of your shot, it looks fine. So the next thing we need to do is go into the sand and give that a little bit more character, because at the moment it's just beige. Now I could use, I've got various sand textures that I could use, but sand is made up of such fine particles, and I don't think there's any great, I just think we're more likely to have a problem seeing the tiling of the texture than we are of convincing us it's sand. So I think I'm just going to add some noises to this to make it a bit more sand-like. I'll do this in the color channel. I'm going to add some noise, which I'm going to, I guess, multiply over. And let's knock the scale down. Now, why are we seeing that in some places and not others? Just going to turn the displacement off a minute, see if that's making any. No, it's not really making any difference at all. So let's try this on the 2D setting. And how have we got that mapped? Okay, what about if we put that at cubic? That's better. Right, we've got to keep in mind the scale we're working at here, because that sound's obviously got to look in proportion to its the rest of the location. So let's go out, come in again. If I go over to the edge of the river, that might help. If I can find it. There it is. I say river, this is not necessarily a river, it's going to be bluish water, probably sort of like seawater really. I want to create the effect, I think, of this being a little bit more almost tropical looking. Certainly that kind of lushness of green and sand. I'm just going to change the time of the day as well so we can get a brighter sun, a bit more overhead. It should help. Let's up this to 100. Right, so what that's telling me is this scale, lower that a bit more there, the scale of the noise is still too high. I'm going to put it to 1. Oh, in fact, can I get away with 0.5? I think I can. Okay, I'm going to lower the delta. Typically when you lower the size of noise, you should lower the delta down as well. I don't know how far to go with that necessarily, but let's leave that there. And I'm going to change the colour of this so it's more sand coloured rather than black. This is just the dark part of the noise. Doesn't want to be too saturated. It's a bit more subtle. And I think what I'll do is put this inside a layer and add another one. Perhaps I'm just going to copy this one. Copy shader, and just click on here, shader noise, but paste this one into it instead. I'm going to overlay this one. But what I'm going to do here is I'll probably make this one darker. And I'm going to adjust the clip. I'm just going to bring up the scale of it again so I can see what I'm doing in this window here. This is just to add a little bit more variation in noise. And then I'm going to scale that back down again. Maybe do this at 2%. No, try that at 1. Does it add anything? Let's have a look, really. Yeah. Let's just alter the seed. And maybe do this at 0.7. I just want it to overlay it and have a slight difference to the noise below it, because we're obviously seeing less noise because I've pushed the clip, so there's much more white in it. I don't need that. Put that down to there. And let's go in a bit closer. On that first noise, I'm going to bring that down to 0.2. I want to make it even finer. And on the one above it, I'm going to bring that down to 0.5. I'm just going to lower that down to maybe 70%. I think that probably does enough of the job that I need it to do to say this is sand. But what I do want to do actually is the same thing I've done elsewhere, is actually add some noise to break up the colour of it a little bit. First thing I'm going to do is, yeah, I'll just add a little bit of variation. Use Wavy Turbulence for this. I'm going to do the same again, put that onto UV2D since we've got this cubically mapped. Seems to get a better effect. But I don't want it to be that scale, and I certainly don't want it to be that dark and dirty, so I'm going to clip that again so the white's a bit more evident. I don't want to darken the black end up because that'll just make it too dirty. But I could bring the white in. And again, I'm going to take that away from being black and a bit more into the sand colour. Or a tone of it anyway. And that does just add enough variety. I'm not entirely sure whether I need that to be. That may not work looking at the way that's mapping there because of the cubic thing. I might need to change that around. Let's put that back to UV. These are going to alter all the noise. I think it might map better. What if I do that? That makes no difference, obviously, because it's UV matte. Okay. We get in again and have a look at that close up. Oh, not that close. Still too close. Oh, in the water, that's why. Alright, the noises are stretching because they're being obviously stretched across the whole UV map. So let's just focus on this top noise for a minute. If I alter the ratio of this to 1000, got to think about what that's doing now. Let me just alter this to the same, see what we get. Okay, going the wrong way. So, oops, 100. Let's do that down to 10. Sorry, 1. Try that at 1 and try that at 10. That might be closer, but turn that one off. Just want to see this one. Yeah, that's better. All I'm doing obviously is compensating for the mapping on the entire UV space, this 20,000 by 2,000 ratio, and this probably is a bit clearer now. If I set this to 100, probably not very clear in that one at all. Let's have a look. Set that one down to 10. There's the point I'm trying to get across. You can see that that's basically stretching. So what I want to do is get this down to being a bit more regular proportioned noise. Seem to have lost the stretch there. And that's right, because it's 10. My ratio of this terrain is 10 to 1. So if I do this that way, then that should stretch a bit the other way. Let's push it. Yeah, see that's stretching over in that other direction. So put that down to 10, and I think that's okay. So I just need to do the same with the other noise, which is this one. 1 and 10. There we go. So hopefully now that looks a bit better. Now we need to just alter the diffusion one, which is still set to texture that needs to be on UV 2D. And I'm going to find a new scale for that. So let's just take that down to say 50%. Okay, we're getting closer, but still a long way away. I need to change this relative scale to 1/10. So again, brings it into being correctly mapped onto this ratio of terrain. And then we can up that up again to say 150. Need to pull out a bit, get a better view. It's probably still a bit too much. Okay, I'm going to go even further with that. And I'm going to knock the opacity of that down to maybe 60%. I want it to be a subtle difference. You see, it's just got a slight variation in tone. I can probably even go less, just to make it so it's not an all even creamy sandy colour. Looking here, I'm not sure the noise is quite the right scale in terms of the sand dots. I'll zoom in again. Oh, it's kind of relative. Lower the opacity of that one. So I think that's the one that's. If I just up that to 100, I think it's going to make the noise look a little bit too. Yeah. So I'm going to come back into these again. I'm going to alter the global scale of this to 0.1, and the layer above I'm going to make it 0.3, and just up that again to maybe 60%. These are all minor tweaks, but again, in the overall effect of things, they tend to work. Now, certainly the other thing that would help now if we sorted out the water. Now, in the original colony concept, we did play around with. Let's just turn that off. We did play around with this water material here, where we set the distance. So I'm going to just basically copy this over. One place to paste there, and put that onto the water plane instead of this one. Is that right? There we go. And just click refresh. Oh, immediately that's better. Starting to look a little bit more like water. But I think I would like to make this look a little bit more blue. Turn this down again. Turn that down. Make it quicker again. What a fabulous thing is this plugin. It's very useful. Right, going to call up the water from our other document, and just look at what we've got set in here. I'd like to make this a bit more blue than this. And probably alter the absorption distance, because I want this to be a little bit more blue, tropical feeling really. So let's tweak these. Just going to turn that off for now. Close that. Right. Let's go into the transparency of this, and I can leave that the way it is. I'm going to knock this down to about 95 and alter the colour of this, make it much, much paler. Let's go almost all the way there. And knock the saturation down a little bit as well. Maybe bring that back over there a little bit. Somewhere between blue and green is where I want. I'll maybe up that a bit. And saturation is fine. That's fine. Okay, let's go with that. That looks a little too clear, doesn't it? Let's alter the distance on that as well. See what that looks like. Well, that's very pale. Maybe a little bit too much. I'm going to try this at 0.03. No, sorry, 0.003. 0.003. No, it's just a default 0.3 anyway. What do I need to do to make this better? What do we got? Look at the actual transparency color. Okay, let's alter that a little bit more blue. Take the saturation down a little bit. Okay, I think maybe I need to make this a little bit darker. Pull it in a bit there. Oh. And you see subtle differences. It's so delicate a balance. Okay, let me put that back to where it was, 0.03. Oops, it's incorrect. 0.03. Put that to there. I need that to be a little bit more blue. Let's go 185. I'll pull that over there a bit. Be a bit more saturated. It's probably close actually to what I want. Yeah. Oh, I know where we've got an issue here. We've just got this as a plane, haven't we? Whereas in the other, in our terrain, we made this as a volume, which kind of helps. It still works. You still get the effect, but it seems to be better when it's in a volume. Maybe I need to just reduce that down. Oh, maybe we can get away with that for now. Just look at the reflectance, make sure that's okay. What do we got? DGX. Bump. 0.25. That's knacky. If I can see any bump in that, let's go closer. Okay, I can. Just do with taking up a little bit. Okay. I think that's pretty effective, actually, considering this is all just procedurally generated. You see, the advantage of this is tweakability, if you like. Now, what I can't do, I'll just show this to you, actually. Let's turn this off for a second. It will be tempting to sort of take all this and just copy this over straight into our colony as is, but the thing I need to do is I need to add a deformer to this to bend it. Now, from experience, I know this won't work simply because we're using shaders which are affected by altitude and slope. So let me just close this out. If I get a bend deformer and just alter its orientation, well, not that way, holding shift to constrain it. I'm going to put that underneath or inside this group, the colony group again. Keep y-axis, and I'm just going to give it a strength of 6. We're not actually oriented the right way on that bend still. Let's have a look. Which way are we going? Was it right in the first place? Oh, it's unlimited, that's why. Always make that mistake. So it should be oriented that way. We don't want it to be as severe as that, but let's just say it's 1. Now, if I just bring back our preview plugin, you can see that that's completely screwed up all of that, the work we've done basically in terms of getting that terrain looking interesting, because there's obviously no way that it's going to keep those altitude related things. You see the sand's just coming in here and the rock's here. I don't know if that continues all the way up, but then it starts to get rocky at the top there. So because we're on a slope. So in certain scenarios, you can prevent this from happening. Let's just dock this again. You can prevent this from happening by applying a tag. If I go into here and do Cinema 4D tags, where are we? I need to find. Why is it you can't find these things when you're looking at stick texture? There we go. Stick texture in certain situations, or in most situations, will allow you to then deform an object, and the texture will stay exactly where it should be, attached to the UVs on that material. But unfortunately, in this instance, because we're using these altitude and stuff, it makes no difference whatsoever. So the only way that I'm going to get around this and be able to use the work that's been done here, let's get rid of this bend now, and to retain the effect of all these altitude-related effects, is to bake this texture out, or bake these textures out as one texture map to apply to the terrain. So I'm going to go and carry on making a few more tweaks, because I'm not entirely happy with the way this is working just yet, and then we'll look at baking this out. Okay, so continuing on, just looking at this material, I was a bit curious of this. The use global coordinates should work, but why that's doing that and making that look that way was not clear to me until just now. I just had a look at this. What this is telling me actually is that this terrain is rotated slightly or something, because it seems to be leaning downwards. Again, this is so sensitive that the altitude aspect is obviously sort of trailing off and it just suggests that the terrain is rotated. So I've just had a look, and in fact it is. So let me just turn that preview off. Look, 0.64, that's all it is. But if I'll turn that back on again actually. If I zero that out, then straight away we're back to where we should be. But there's some other things here. I just want to make sure I'm at absolute zero on these to get things looking correctly. I'm just going to zero out all of these, and even the water terrain seems to be in a slightly odd place. Now I've lifted that water slightly, which has created these sort of pools, puddles of shallower water, but I like this. I think I'm going to stick with having this kind of effect. Again, it gives a bit more of a suggestion of a sort of tropical-ish terrain. I'm going to move this preview to underneath the viewport so we can get a narrower view and just look at the terrain in its length. Of course, I'm not seeing the whole thing because what that's previewing is this. If you see the area here, this is my my visible window, which is probably set to HD 1920 by 1080 ratio. So I'm just going to go in there and tweak that, move that down to maybe 500. Let's see what it looks like. Just so I can see exactly what the dimensions are on this, the ratio I'm working at. I'm just going to go to mode and view settings and go to view, sorry. See the opacity here. If I up this to say 70%, now I can see the actual viewport as it should be. So I'm going to alt that to 550, not 55, 550. Thank you. Let's make that wider. Okay, now I'm going the wrong way. Let's make it 450. That's better. Now we get a near one-to-one kind of rendition of what's going on up here. Okay. Just sort of checking it out to see what I may want to tweak further. I think what I'd like to do actually is add another band of green between the sand and the sort of rougher mountainy grass. Something that's just maybe a little bit more lush green. Than the upper grass. Maybe not quite so bumpy, so it's more manicured, let's say, more pasture-like, rather than higher terrain type grass. Okay. So what I'm going to do is duplicate this terrain, material, sorry, and go in, turn displacement off, and similarly I'm going to go into the layer and swap this one out for another one I know there, which is slightly greener, which is Grassy Mound 3. It's just a bit more lush as a starting point, and I'm going to turn off diffusion for now. Maybe we'll make the mix strength on this a little bit higher in favour of the texture, so make it 65. And what I need to do as well then is I need to add this into the mix. I'm going to put that back below the sand. So now that's completely replaced the dark green below it. So I need to add the same thing I've got going on here. I need to add a Falloff. Not Falloff, sorry, terrain mask. and the alpha. So in fact I'm just going to copy this one over, copy shader, go into this green, put this in the alpha, paste shader. So currently that's going to be set the same as the sand, so we're not really going to see it. So I just want to extend the distance of this out. If I make this 0.6, you see that we get a very definite light green, dark green change. Which is not necessarily what I want, but you can see that you can see where the next grass source kicks in, which is useful at the moment. I'm going to move this viewport again, preview, to being at the side of the main viewport. So it's a better orientation to look at things. Well, that's messing things up there a little bit. Let's alter this to 0.5. So what I'm going to do, because this is displacement is getting mucked up, if I just turn that off again on here, what I'm going to do is put this displacement, or this blank terrain, I'm going to turn the displacement off as I've done, and I'm actually going to put this inside or use a displacement deformer to control the peaks on this. So holding down shift, I'm going to the deformers menu and going to find displacer, which does nothing at the moment, but I'm going to set the height of that to 0.8, the same as the original terrain. Change that to intensity, the same as the original displacement, and I'm going to pull in the displacement material, which we baked out from our major terrain. That's better. It's a bit easier to preview, plus we get a bit more interesting stuff going on. Now obviously this is not a smoothed version of the terrain, because it's all it's doing is applying displacement across this fairly low or lower poly terrain, the level 1 terrain, but nevertheless it's sort of adding a little bit more detail to it, so a little bit more terrain, well, displacement, I think we're better way of putting it. But we're certainly not getting the effects that we were getting before, which were a bit ugly to look at. So we can use this to preview what we do with our grass material blend now. So I don't really want it to be quite as severe a blend as that. So I'm going to go into the new grass material and have a look at tweaking those settings as well. So I'm quite happy with the altitude of it, but I think maybe it needs a different softening. It's probably too much taken away. Let's just try this, see what difference this makes. I think this might soften the join. That's okay. Just going to lower that. Okay, so somewhere around 20. Now, what would certainly help actually, if I turn back on the diffusion, which is the same as the one that's on the main darker terrain, that's better. I'm just going to leave it off a second though, because I want to refine this blend between the two, because it's still a bit harsh. Zero 0.4. It seems to be a bit of a juggle between these settings, trying to work out the best way of doing it. In fact, we probably don't need noise at all. We'll just have an actual soft blend. That's better. somewhere around there maybe. Going to go in closer. Not that close. Come over a bit. Now there's something else I've just discovered that I need to change, again because of the ratio, the way this has been applied to this terrain. This is quite stretched, so I need to go into the color channel and make this 0.1. No, I need that to be. Let's try 1. No, that's far too extreme. Why can't I get a 0.1 and a 0.01? I can. There we go. But the scale of that is now too high. I just need to get this scale proportion down lower. So I think if I do this, I'll try and do a 0.001 and a 0.01. Okay, not 11. That's better. But I need to do the same with the darker green. So 0.001, 0.01. That seems better. Let's just come out again. I obviously don't want the actual grass texture to show up in the detail that it has in it, because it's completely the wrong scale. So hopefully this will be enough. Let's put the diffusion back on again. That helps. Right. I think that's fairly nice. I certainly like what's going on here with these little islandy bits or little bits of rougher terrain mixed with very shallow water. That's great. Again, it's very angled and square because of the resolution of the terrain, but that should be okay, because what I will do actually is bring the displacement back on. It's probably going to push everything to the max, but I just need to set it to round geometry as well. So what that's done, that's taken us a step further on from where we were in terms of the detail in our terrain, because it's pushed the displacement higher. We're already using a displacement object and displacement in the material. It may be too much, and I might need to find the balance between the two. But I think this would be good, even though I don't necessarily want this terrain to be this hilly in the actual finished thing in the colony. I certainly like what's going on with the materials, with the texture blend. So if I can get these textures baked with this kind of roughness of terrain, even if I then make the terrain smoother, i.e. use less displacement, it's still going to benefit from the look, I think, of this blend of textures. It's a bit more interesting and again more organic looking, which is always the desired result. I just need to work out if I need to tweak the amount of sand showing. I think we could benefit from a little bit more of that. Again, these things alter with everything you do, everything you change. I'll just turn that displacement off again. we should see we get a bit more beach back. In fact, if I turn the displacer off, just need to update. You see, we've got a lot more sand. So put the displacement material on. It is finding a bit of a mix between the two. It doesn't update for some reason when I do the displacer. So I'm going to pull back on the amount of displacement being applied to something like 0.2. So that's a little bit more subtle. I'll lower this back down to 50%. Turn aliasing off. If I turn that off completely, what's it look like? Minor difference. I'm just going to up that to 1 so I can be sure of what's going on. Oh yeah, okay. I can see the severity of that now. So turn that down to 0.2. And let's have a look in the displace object itself. Okay, I'm going to try that at 0.6. Put this back where it was. Okay, what I want to do is alter the height of the sand. So I'm going to go to 0.4 just to see what happens. It's a bit more beach. Let's go to 0.35. I think that's probably quite nice. Or nice enough. Let me just change the time of the day. Just want to see what it's like with a little bit more shadow on it. That's quite good. I'm just wondering whether I want to sort of tweak the join a little bit more between the sand and grass. It's become quite definite again. I quite liked it when it was a bit more noisy. As I say, these things have been altered simply because of the tweaks in displacement and height of terrain, etc. Let's go 25 on that. Go out to a bigger view again. Just going to move the preview window again. See what effect this has. Well, I've just lost that window now. Gone off my screen. There we go. Okay. I'm going to play around with these settings for a minute. See the major differences between them. Okay, that's very harsh. So let's go 40. Okay, nothing at all. So 30. This is roughly where we had it. Alter the noise scale. Going to go somewhere in the middle of that, I think. And let's try this 0.5. I'm just trying to get a little bit more of this back, a little bit more of this kind of dappled detail where grass is kind of blending with sand. It's the displacement being messed up again. Again, subtle differences seem to make all the difference. Let's see what we do if we do 0.7. That's a little bit more defined. Maybe a little too much. I keep tweaking this backwards and forwards because I'm trying to find that just that magic blend between the two, which I think works and is somewhat more realistic without sort of going too far with it. I think that's kind of convincing, or convincing enough of the kind of environment we're trying to create. I zoom in on that area there. Oops, over there. I think that's quite a good blend of everything. Okay, just want to make sure I've got enough of my diffusion effect on there. So maybe get that to 60. On the sand. It's just to make it a little bit more patchy. Bump wise, we don't have any bump. Let's copy that across any one of these, which is the smallest one. And that one, 0.1%, 1 by 10. Okay, just recreate that. Noise. And we want that to be 0.1%. We need to do that, I'm not sure. Let's just take that up to something silly so we can see what it's doing. If anything. Back where it was. What's quite useful actually in these instances is to go into your render settings and use the material override command. Just click that on and it just instantly takes out any color texture information, but it will leave us with all the noises and such like. If I look on there, we got rid of diffuse color, etc., but we still see bump, noise and displacement. So that really helps to clarify what's going on with like just the bump channels. That's so small, I don't know whether that's really even noticeable. Okay, I'm going to have some bump in there, but I'm not going to knock it down because I think when that's baked that might be a little bit overly harsh. So yeah, kind of see it, but maybe I just put a larger scale bump in there, which just sort of makes the sound a bit more wavy looking. That might do a better job. let's just take this back to something like 50 and change that noise to what have we got? Over, a little bit too severe. Let's pull up the previews. RNO is quite nice. Again, with far less of it. Let's make that something like 25%. And make that maybe even as small as 1%. It's just something to make the sand have a little bit more of a undulation to it, if you like, without being too in your face. Okay, I'm going to switch back to textures so we can yeah, it's debatable whether that makes any major difference or not, really. But I do want to give myself some of this detail in there in case I do decide to get down to that closer level. And wherever I can do this with a procedural noise or such like, then that's great. Alright, I'm going to go in between, I'm going to play that to 3. So we've got the effect, but it's not quite so severe. Now I just want to check the noise I've got going on in the grasses here. Look at the lighter grass. Come on, preview. What's going on? Let's turn that off for a second. Okay, it's just catching up. So on this one, we have got turbulence at 60%. I'm going to lower the scale of that. I'm going to make this grass, it's softer, finer grass. So let's make that 30%. Maybe we'd knock that down to 50%. Let's preview. Again, to see the actual bump in action, I'm just going to quickly put the material override on again. It just allows you to see that much clearer. So I'm just going to go over to where these two grasses meet. Yeah, I think that's looking good enough, actually. Come out a little bit and you see the rocks as well. Right, one thing I realised that I'd like to add is sort of a wet mark at the edge of the sand. It seems quite logical to add that. It'll create a better crossover between the water and the sand as well. So I'm going to copy this one, copy our sand one, paste. I'm just going to turn this preview off for a minute, we don't need that. In fact, I'm just going to undock it. I'll put it there, that's probably easier. Not quite there. There. It's better. I'll just move that across for now. And I'm going to change this, actually. I shouldn't have done this. Showing the area of the document is a bit too dark. So I'm going to go into mode, view settings, view and change that back to 10%. I shall make it 20 so I can still see it, but it's not in my face. Right, so we create a new material or a copy of the sand, and basically I just need to make it darker apart from anything else. Let's just bring this down a little bit. Saturation, and then lower the brightness. That's the biggest thing, or the value. If I bring that down to about 50, I think. So I can drag that onto my terrain. It needs to be above the sand, of course. It's going to darken it in the water area, and I need to alter the terrain mass, the altitude. So I'm going to do that about 0.2. This is where I'm going to need my preview back again. Let's bring that over there. And zoom in. Not over there. Let's find a bit of sand. Water's edge. There we go. You can see it straight away. It's not quite right, but okay, so we got 0.2. Let's lower that to maybe 22. See a bit more of it. I think I'm going to lose the noise. I don't really need it to be patchy and broken up, so I'm just going to zero that out. That kind of works. Let's go to another position. That works very well, I think. Simple enough. That's quite nice actually, because that's put in sort of a slightly darker area there where water would have collected, or it might be more damp, and it's equally shown at the edges. Okay. Just want to get to an area where there's a bit more. There we go. A bit more sand visible. That looks okay. I think what I might do actually as well is slightly lower the opacity of the water at the edge, so it's not quite so blue and it's absolute fall off. So I'm just going to open the water material up, and in the transparency, just try reducing the distance. Sorry, extending the distance. Okay, start by tweaking the colour of this a bit. Up the saturation a little bit. If I take that value all the way to 100, yeah, we get something that's a bit more paler blue. It's not quite so opaque, which I like, and equally zero that out. That's better. I think that's better because basically that shows up the water's far more transparent at the very edge, and it also shows us our wet mark quite well as well. Let me just look at that again. I'll lower the value to 40%. Make it darker still. Yeah. That's better. I think that makes the join between water and sand a little bit more convincing. Or maybe a little bit harsh actually. Split the difference, 45. Okay. Now, the only other thing I want to do is just check the diffusion noises on the grass aspect of things, and also the blend, because it's looking rather, I can see a lot of the grass texture, and I'm not sure it's being broken up enough with diffusion. So just going to look at those materials. Okay. Actually, the way to do that, we'll just take the mix of that down to nothing. So we just see flat green. Let's reduce that again. Preview speed. Let's come over here. That kind of looks alright, I think. In fact, that makes me wonder whether I can actually get away with less of the grass texture. Maybe I'll do that at 40. So it's still there, but not quite so dominant. Okay. Now, what about the grass down here? Let's have a look at that. I feel like that should be lighter. I'm just going to turn that right down as well. Now, problem is I've got that the same colour green as here, so I need to brighten that up. Maybe a bit more saturated. Maybe a little bit more towards yellow. A little bit brighter again. I'm just going to push it for a minute, see how far I really need to go. Okay, I'm going to go into these areas where it's more of the lighter green, while still seeing a bit of the darker green for contrast. Okay. I'm just going to bring the mix again, make it the mix of the texture up again. Yeah, I had it around here, and I think there's probably a little bit too much going on. Too much noise. Or maybe push that one to 50. Just going to turn the diffusion off a minute. Okay, let me just turn that down again. I'm going to turn the bump off. I really just want to get a better idea of what's going on that texture. So let me put the diffusion back on. That's just darkening it, it's not actually adding any patches. So what have we got going on there? No, up that to 100. Let's turn that one off. Put that on normal. I don't appear to be seeing any noise breaking this green up. So why is that? Let's have a look at this one. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to just turn off the displacement as well. Just do that in the render settings for now. Options, set poly displacement. It just evens it out even more to make it a bit easier to see. So that's obviously not applying correctly. Let's try it in 2D, UV 2D space. Oh, I can see it doing it there. If I put that down to 50. Oh, of course it's stretched, isn't it? So let's do that one down to 10. So we know that our ratio is 10 to 1. Yeah, see that's altering it now. Let's try that 25, see what it does. Yeah, that's breaking it out more. Maybe a little too much. So I'm going to go back up to say 40 on that. In fact, no. I'm going to go back down where I was. I'm going to say 20 because that's a small scale noise, which is fine. What I need to add above that is the other one. I need to put that in 2D mode or fitting, and I need to change that to something like 70. At a guess. Change that down to 10. So it's 10 to 1. And then make sure these are multiplying over the top of each other, and zoom in somewhere where I can see that. Yeah, that's broken that up more, but it's also darkening it quite a bit, so let's reduce that to say 70%. Yeah, it's still visibly breaking it up. I'm afraid I'm going to come lighter, I think, with the green. And a little bit more saturated. Always got to be wary. So it's very easy to over saturate grasses and make things look unnaturally green. Let's bring that back in again as well. Okay, I'm even going to go back up to 50, I think. Now we've broken it up a bit more, it's a bit more palatable. I'm just going to up that diffusion 75. Subtle, but still there. Bump as well. That's better. And I'm just going to check out then as well the main darker green. Just move so we can see some more of that. Without the rocks, preferably. That's it. See a bit of both there, which is good. Now the darker green, do that again. I'm going to knock that down to 0. Take off the bump and displacement in this case. That's easier. Oh, that's fine. That's doing what it should be doing, I think. Diffusion, I might up that one to 80. I'll bring everything else back. Bump. Well, no, let's just do this first. Let's do the color blend. I think 40 is still good. I reckon I can go more with that. Yeah, that's okay. I'll put the pump back on and displacement. Nice. Okay. Actually, I'm not sure what that displacement is working because that's. It's a mystery. Right, let's have a look. I think that's looking pretty nice. Okay, so what I'm going to do is just put the preview back down here. Just have a little look at that. Just up the quality, turn up the anti-aliasing. Nice. Now, the only thing that I'm seeing I would like to change is a bit more diffusion. I want to make these a bit more noticeable, these patches underwater. That just adds a bit more visual interest to the depth of it, I guess. And really, that's as simple as just turning up the darkness of it, really. I may turn it down a fraction on the lighter sand. So it's like at 50. Just come out a bit. Yeah, I think that serves the purpose quite well. Now I'd need to bake this, but as long as I get the resolution correct, I think this probably will work reasonably well at close renders, really. Just lower that down. Turn that off. The other way to see if this is working as a landscape as such is to put an environment object in there. Turn on some fog. Set the distance to maybe 160. I'm going to make it a little blue in colour. Let's go to this end of it actually. It's just for fun. I'm going to turn the time of day up to somewhere near sunset. Just rotate See what this looks like in different lights. Taking into account that hopefully we'll lose these when we bake it. Yeah. Okay, cool. Just going to delete that, put that back to a higher sun, middle part of the day. Okay, I think that in terms of textures and shaders and the overall look, I think that's okay. I think as long as it bakes well, we'll be set. And this will really start to come to life when we add trees and various other things. Okay, so I'm going to save that now, and we'll look at setting it up for baking.